Hello, my name's Steve Joordens, and I'm the director of the Advanced Learning Technologies Lab at University of Toronto Scarborough. In February 2016, I was very fortunate to be invited to be part of an event named the Perfect Storm. It was an event all about applying design thinking to innovations in education. And my contribution was to just give three short talks along the way. This is one of them. This one focuses on really the very first step of applying any kind of thinking to innovation, really, which is figuring out what the problem is that you're going to solve, and that this can be specifically challenging in the context of what we call wicked problems. Okay, so here's my wicked problem. Ooh, scary. Um, what do we mean by wicked problems? Well, first, generally, they tend to be these big issues where we have this big term on something, and I'm going to be using the term personalized learning a lot in this talk. So let's think about personalized learning. You know, this big concept of personalized learning, and we would like to perhaps make our classes more personal. How do we do it? Well, when we think about something like that, we notice that big things like that have a number of characteristics that can make them very difficult to even think about. First part is the normal solutions we have don't seem to be working. Okay, so we have some dissatisfaction. In fact, if we look over here, there's often a gap between the expressed values, beliefs, and attitudes of the community and their behaviors and practice. So those of us in the education system may wish that the educational experience for our students was more personal, that they felt more engaged, that they felt more connected to each other and to the learning experience in general. But we feel like it's not as good as it could be. And so we feel this motivation to do something about it. But here are some of the challenges. First of all, there's no clear agreement on the exact nature of the problem. We have this vague thing of making it more personal, but we don't know exactly what that means. And because we don't know what that means, we don't have a clear idea of how to go about innovating, what to do to actually solve or attack this problem. And usually with these problems, there are these complex interdependencies. So they're not easy things to solve. And often when we start trying to solve them, we just notice other problems that come up along the way that also require solving. To make matters even a little worse, we often have multiple stakeholders. So we know this with the education system. We have, administrators that are worried about things like the curriculum and making sure that gets taught well. We have teachers in the classroom who are charged with doing that, but are also on the front lines of working with students. We have parents. We have sometimes if it's innovations, you have technology suppliers and that sort of thing involved as well. So you have all these different stakeholders trying to tackle this kind of fuzzy thing, and it becomes very difficult to know what to do. Okay, so the first step then to innovating in this kind of context is to tame this wicked problem down, to come up with some specific idea of how, in this case, how you could maybe make learning more personal. And then to try to, once you've defined it down, you can try to think about it a little bit more and come up with innovations that might work. So I want to give you some examples of that in the context of personalized learning. I'm going to go through two examples kind of quickly, and then one in a little bit more detail. Okay, so first of all, when we think about personalized learning, this is the sort of big, wicked problem we run into. So we see things like surveys that clearly tell us that personalized learning seems like an important goal to reach. That in situations where learning is more personal, we see more student engagement, improved performance of staff and administration, improved performance of students, greater student retention, higher grades, better attendance. So, it clearly seems like something good to try to obtain. If we can make our classes and our students feel that more personal kind of feeling, that should result in good stuff. Okay, but again, how do we now think about personalized learning, and how do we go about making our classes more personal? All right, let's think about a couple of solutions. Here's one way to come at it that makes a lot of sense, but may not work so well in the K-12 classroom, and that is if we could just give our students more choice, if we could allow them to direct what they actually learn about, then they might be able to align their learning more with their intrinsic motivation. So if we could give them like a menu and they chose what to learn. Now, there's a couple of problems with this. First of all, this is embodied in technologies like Coursera and edX, so those sort of MOOC platforms that will allow students to learn about anything they want. Works very well for the continual learner, the adult learner. But in the K-12 context, we have this curriculum we have to teach. And it becomes a little more challenging to figure out how you could allow students to choose what they want to study while still sticking to that curriculum. So, a good idea, if you think about it this way, here's an innovation that can help you. It's just not clear that innovation can help the K-12 teacher all that much. All right. Well, here's another notion. Maybe what we need to do is think more about what students are doing outside of the classroom when they're trying to learn the material. And we know that some students find certain things very easy to learn, some not so much. So maybe we could tailor the kind of homework to their skill level. And this is what's grabbed in so-called adaptive learning kind of technologies. The idea is these technologies get a sense of how good a student is doing, and then they adjust the exercises to match the skill level, and thereby help the student achieve benchmarks that they need to achieve. Okay, well, that's one way of thinking about it. And if that's how you think of personalized learning, then you have an approach there that you could try. I want to show you a third way, and I hope you're already starting to see that based on how you think of what does personalized learning mean, you come up with a different solution. I want to think about it this way. This is the way I like to think about it, and I literally like to deconstruct this term personalize. It's not so easy to deconstruct sometimes. So I like to say things like this. We don't teach students anything. Rather, what we do is we create the context and inspire the motivation that convinces students to teach themselves. Only they can really teach themselves. We're more like cheerleaders, glorified cheerleaders of a sort. Therefore, we need them to feel like people. So when I think of personalized, I literally start thinking about the psychology literature and what do we know from the psychology literature that tells us about how to make something more personal, or perhaps what happens if we don't. Okay, so now let me tell you about a couple of things and kind of walk you through the way I think about this problem. Again, is another example of how to attack the wicked problem of personalized learning. All right. There's an interesting psychological literature that looks at aging people and their mental health. And what that literature shows is something kind of interesting. If you look at older people in Western societies, we see a relatively high prevalence of things like depression, especially. But we see much less prevalence of that in Eastern societies, in the more Eastern cultures. Now, there's a distinct difference in how we treat our elderly in these cultures, and I've represented that to some extent in these pictures. In the West, we very often will set our elderly up in a care home, an assisted living home, or a nursing home, and we have this mentality that goes something like this. Dad, you've worked very hard all your life. You took care of all of us. Now you're at a point in your life where you can just relax. So now we have an apartment for you in this place where everything is done for you. The cooking is done. If you need medication, they come and give you your medication when you need it. Your laundry, your sheets are done for you. Isn't this great? There's nothing you have to do except just enjoy your life. What we tend to find is they don't. They don't enjoy their life very much. In Eastern cultures, it's very common for, in fact, the elderly members of some family to live with that family. And so they continue to be part of that family. They often live in the same house. They often have roles. They may help with the cooking. They may help with the childcare. They may do some errands. They may do laundry. They are expected to be a contributing member of the family. And what we find in those cultures is that they tend to feel happier and healthier. So there's sort of a general notion we can take from this. For anybody to feel engaged in anything, including life itself, we have to feel we are playing or sharing an important role. And this role has to impact people other than ourselves. We are social beings and we need to have a social purpose. We need to feel like we are having some sort of positive influence on the other people around us. If we don't, if suddenly there's nothing we have to do except please ourselves, we are not happy. Okay? We need some sort of role of that sort. Let's take that principle and let me add one other quick psychological finding. In the clinical literature, there was a big shift between early Freudian therapy and more what we call humanistic Rogerian therapy. And this is how Carl Rogers himself kind of describes that shift. In my early professional career, I was asking the question, how can I treat or cure or change this person? Now I would phrase the question in this way. How can I provide a relationship with which this person may use for his own personal growth? What Rogers is highlighting here is something I like to call directiveness. Rather than having a therapist say, all you need to do is X, Y, Z in order to feel better, you can be much more non-directive and chat with the person and let the person come to their own conclusions about things they might do that would improve their life. So in Rogerian therapy, you're more of a sounding board that this person uses, and your role is more to guide them to eventually come to their own conclusions. And what we find in this case is that the clients tend to own those strategies a lot more. When they come to some idea about what they should do to change, well, it was their idea. And they're much more likely to follow up on that idea and much more likely to have therapeutic success. They feel empowered. Okay? So these are the kinds of things we can do to make somebody feel more like a person that matters. We can give them a role in whatever process they're part of. Make them a real part of what's going on. And we can be a little less directive. We don't tell them exactly what they have to do. We allow them to some extent to decide the best actions. Okay, let's think of these things. And now let's think of the current educational context. If we think about teaching, it tends to be pretty directive. And, the teacher is sending the information to the students. And the students are, well, it's kind of like one of these assisted living homes. We do everything for the student. We decide what the lecture, the course will be about today. We provide the lecture, we provide the homework, we tell them what to do. So again, it's this very directive, you must learn this, this, and this. And the student is just expected to learn. Okay, just take care of yourself, worry about yourself. We got everything else under control. Kind of directive, not a lot of role in the actual learning process for the students. This is also true, by the way, of how we assess students. Yes, we have a many-to-one relationship here, but in some ways it's a one-to-one relationship. The teacher provides the assignment, tells students what to do, given students do the assignment and send it back to the teacher, who assesses the assignment and sends their assessment back to the student. So it's kind of like this one-on-one connection where we have a powerful authority figure who's directing things, and this student is having very little impact on the learning that any other students are experiencing. So again, it's got that directive nature, and it's got that nature where we can almost imagine walls between all of the students, where they're not sharing and they have no control over the learning that's happening. This is not unlike the situation that the elderly face that I described. And in fact, if you look at your typical student, wow, it's the same look in the eyes, right? This is a look of having no power over what's going on and just being expected to do stuff and kind of be happy for what everyone's doing for you. All right. So when you take all this together and you say, okay, now I want to come up with a learning experience that's more personal, what do? Well, we basically leverage those two things that I mentioned. We need to give students a more active role in their learning, and we need to be less directive, empowering students to determine the specific form learning takes. Um, that's at least the principles you come to with this taming of the personalized learning approach, right? When you follow that line. Now, can you build technologies that allow you to do this? Well, yes, you can actually, and we have one, and I'm not going to talk about it too much, but it's around the assessment area, and our goal is literally to produce this kind of situation, one where students are interacting a lot more with one another and trying to help each other learn. The teacher's still there, the teacher's still overseeing, but their influence is less directive and more supportive. Most of the education is actually driven by the students. How do we do that? Well, in the context of peer scholar, and I want to say actually that peer learning in general kind of follows this principle. This specific example, just to give you a taste of, is an assessment tool. It allows you to do activities that exercise a bunch of 21st century skills in the students. I'm not going to highlight that right now, but let me just give you the basic sense of how this works. Students do three things. First, they submit something. So let's just imagine it's a written assignment. Now, in the second step, they actually see the assignments that some of their peers submitted. They're randomly selected from the class and presented anonymously, but we now ask the student to be the teacher. We're sharing roles here. We're going to give them a good rubric. We're going to scaffold this all we need to, but ultimately we're going to tell the student, you have to look at each of your peers' submissions, and your job is to give them some idea about how their work could be better, how they could improve their work. That's your goal. So basically, you now are the teacher, and you're going to go through and assess each student's work and to try to provide them with some supportive feedback. Okay? So yeah, this exercise is critical thought, creative thought, communication skills, all in a collaborative situation. And of course, students are seeing what other students did on the same assignment that they performed. And so they're able to directly compare their work to their peers' work, which is very good for their metacognitive and self-reflective skills. But the thing I want to highlight here is we're actually letting them be part of the learning process. We're involving them in the teacher role. And we're letting them kind of figure out what that means. So yes, we're being supportive, but we're not being directive. We're essentially going to turn the students loose and allow them to figure out what they think is wrong with some piece and communicate that. Now, while they're doing this with, let's say, 5 of their peers are doing it to their work. So in the final step, they now see what their peers said about their own work, and they're given a chance to first critically analyze what every peer said, because these are peers. Some of them are really smart, some not so much. So a student is encouraged to critically think about what every peer wrote, but then ultimately to take that and decide how to revise their work for a final submission. And again, here's where we're allowing them to kind of figure stuff out. We're not saying change this, change that, change that. We're saying, well, some peers suggested you should change it, but should you? You decide, you think, and you employ the changes you want to make. So this kind of process has those attributes where we're allowing the student to be much more playing a role in the learning, and we have a less directive role of the teacher. Okay, so again, I highlight this only to kind of show you that tie, that as you walk down from the wicked problem of personalized learning to a very specific notion of that problem, then you can ultimately walk to a technology like ours that can help you solve that. All right. What that all means is you've eventually tamed your wicked problem. Here's our wicked problem halfway up a tree, scared of us now. Take that, wicked problem. All right, cool. So I hope you get that sense of that process that's very important, and ultimately it will determine the way you think about innovations and which innovations you think about. So thank you for listening. If you have any questions, you can feel free to send me an email, or here's some contact information for Peer Scholar if you're interested in that at all as well. Alrighty, thank you. Bye-bye. Have a great day.